Can Michael Penix win the Heisman this year? Is he going to get invited to New York? Those are all things we're going to talk about right now on Locked On Huskies.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Huskies. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. You can find all our work for Inside the Huskies at si.com/college/Washington with Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated. Lars, it's great to have you here. Today, we are going to be breaking down, can Michael Penix win the Heisman Trophy? A Husky has never won the Heisman. I really don't even think there's been an invite to New York. We'll probably talk a little bit about Jake Browning 2016 and if he should have been invited. We talk a little bit about marketing. But before we talk about that, I have to remind everybody that this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Lars, let's get right into it here. So when will the marketing campaign begin? I'm sure we both have thoughts on Bo Nix and the whole just bodacious billboards that have gone up in New York, which I want to save my thoughts, but I'm sure just my tone makes it very obvious how I feel about these things.
Yeah, I'll just say I don't think that's going to – I mean, if there's going to be billboards, there'll probably be one in Seattle maybe, and I'm not even sure they'll do that just because I don't think – let's be real, what do billboards – it's a marketing ploy, yes, and it's a very Oregon move to do that. That's never going to be Washington's thing. And if you notice how many other schools around the country do that, like I don't know many other schools. I don't think Ohio State goes and puts up a billboard in Los Angeles of,
can't see
Marvin
there's
Harrison
a Caleb Williams billboard anywhere that I've ever seen, maybe outside of Los Angeles.
Exactly. And so if you're doing it in Eugene, totally, or even Portland, cool, it makes sense. But everything else is just for marketing and attention. That said, I think Washington's campaign has kind of quietly already begun. I think there's a lot of layers to a Heisman campaign, right? It's who are the guys coming into the season? Obviously, you mentioned Caleb Williams at USC. There's probably a few others. But Michael Penix has kind of arguably now cemented himself as that second guy behind Caleb Williams. And now some people, it's your decision how much of a gulf there is between those two. And I think that's where the second part of the Heisman campaign comes, which proving it on the field. Last year, Penix didn't have that going into the season. This season, he does. So he's already ahead of the curve there. And I think the way that UW is going to market it is just going to be almost like how, in a way, they did the Pursuit videos back in 2015 and 2016, where it's going to be a week-by-week sort of thing, maybe like a one-off, especially just for Michael and kind of his Heisman tailored toward, like, hey, follow along this documentary as Michael Penix chases the Heisman. I think that's first of all, it's a better way to do it. And second of all, I think that's just a way that it makes more sense for UW to do it. Doing anything with billboards or maybe Penix taking out an ad in the Seattle Times, that just doesn't necessarily make sense.
That's fair. I like that a lot. And it's something where I totally forgot about the Pursuit stuff until you just mentioned it. But it's something where I think that it's as we record this today on Tuesday, Michael Penix just announced a deal with Simply Seattle. It's a really interesting deal. If you want to go read their press release, it's very interesting how much they're going to be paying. And I feel like that's something that over the course of the year, there might be shirts as he continues to, just prove himself. And he's plus 1,600 right now on FanDuel. Shout out to FanDuel as just to bet for the Heisman, which is, I think, 6th or 7th in total odds. Like, obviously, Caleb Williams is in front of him, a couple of the quarterbacks. I think Jordan Travis and Drake May are up there. I believe Blake Corum at Michigan is also up there. But it's something where not only is he a really good bet right now to win the Heisman, but I feel like one thing that kind of needs to be talked about, there's only been one two-time Heisman winner in the history of the NCAA. And you got to go all the way back to Tony Dorsett for that. Am I right? Like, this is not a common occurrence. And yeah, there aren't many people out there like Caleb Williams. Like, if we look at Lamar Jackson, we look at Johnny Manziel, some of these other underclassmen that won the award, there were still knocks on them. And obviously we've seen Lamar win an NFL MVP, be a super talented player, and Johnny Manziel, whole different story. We don't need to go into that. But it's something where but it's something where when we look at two-time Heisman winners, it's just not a thing. And yeah, Caleb Williams is a different breed. He's going to be the first overall pick whenever he decides to enter into the NFL draft, probably this next year. But it's something where you're probably going to go in a different direction. And USC, when we talk about their their first matchup against San Jose State, they weren't nearly as impressive as we thought they were going to be. Like Zachariah Branch really popped off the page, and yeah, Caleb Williams did Caleb Williams things, but it's kind of like, if that defense doesn't hold up, if that offensive line isn't as solid as we thought it was going to be, the Heisman voters are probably going to end up going in a different direction if that team can't make the Pac-12 championship.
And to that point, also their schedule is not easy. It's not a cakewalk by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, when we talk about that game against UW in November, they've already got to play at least 3 or 4 top 25 teams, if I'm not mistaken, or at least probably will be at various points throughout the season. And they're certainly going to get tested similar to Washington. So I think there's certainly a chance if one of the two loses the game, that's right when the other is going to take over the Heisman contention. Because as you mentioned a few other quarterbacks, as you look around college football, is UNC going to be a top 5 team in the country? No. Is Florida State going to be anything? I mean, they might win like 7 or 8 games, maybe 9 if we're lucky. I don't know. I'm not a big believer in Florida State. That's just personal opinion here. But I think it really is a kind of a 2-track race, because when that game in November honestly could decide if both of them, imagine this, both of them go into that game undefeated. That's your Heisman game right there. Because if whoever wins, that they probably play each other in the Pac-12 championship if kind of the schedule breaks out how it should. The voting for the most part is already done by then. A lot of voters have already kind of surmised their opinion. There's nothing really. I mean, if let's say Washington loses that game and then Michael Penix Jr. ends up winning the Pac-12 championship over USC, I mean, first of all, at the end of the day, they're both going to get invited. It's just a question of, okay, which one goes over the top. And actually, to your point about previous Heisman winners, there's been a couple 2 or 3 time nominated players. I mean, Tim Tebow was one of them, nominated multiple times, but he didn't win it twice. And so I think that allure of I think at the end of the day, they're both going to get invited. I think that's probably the safest bet. That's not on FanDuel or any site because I think it's too safe of a bet. But with that being said, Penix very much has a chance to win this thing if everything goes right.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's something when we as we circle back and start to wrap up here, when we just talk about the marketing itself, one thing that I actually feel just really strongly about is that the marketing and creative team that Kalen DeBoer has just kind of put together is really, really great at their jobs. They've done an amazing job. And that's something where under Chris Peterson and Jimmy Lake to an extent, that team was handcuffed in what they were able to do. And now Kalen DeBoer has said, no, this is something we can expand. And especially now as, we see the Big Ten starting to market Washington and Oregon, USC, UCLA. Wow, that probably won't happen a ton during the season. That's something where that might actually also cause an extra boost. And just with those 2 factors and this move to the Big Ten that'll happen, I think that Washington might be in more of a national spotlight than they were last year, because it felt like even after the Oregon game, really, for the most part, that people wrote off Washington, that they weren't in the spotlight that they could have been. I've gone on Twitter and I've seen some ridiculous comments of like, oh, when did Michael Penix become a good quarterback? And it's like, yeah, you very clearly didn't watch any Husky football last year. Those are real things. I'll send them to you. They're bad. I don't want to do that. But it's really brutal. And it's something where as this move happens and the creative team continues to push out what they can, because we saw towards the end of the year that there was a really strong push. And if they start that now, they start that after week 1 when, maybe a highlight reel or whatever, even though it is Boise State, it's something where it's like, oh yeah, this is a dude that you can push into the national spotlight in and out of weeks. So you can do it every single week.
Well, and I think this isn't a knock on Caleb Williams or any of the other quarterbacks mentioned, and we're slightly a little biased being around him more. But Michael Penix is such a likable player and such a likable person. I think the more that people get to know him, especially this season with all the attention on him, I think it's fair to say that he's going to win over a lot more voters. Maybe not. Again, it's not a slight to say, hey, Caleb is a bad kid. He rubs people the wrong way. I just think Penix is way more approachable. And so I think for certain voters, that's going to help a little bit. I think just as people get to know him, they're going to warm up to him as the season goes along.
Sounds like you're calling Caleb Williams Hollywood, which I think is pretty funny personally. But I got to take a minute here. I got to remind everybody about Gametime. If there's one thing I hate when I'm just trying to plan an event, especially when I want to go to a baseball game or something like that, I hate stress when it comes to tickets because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Lars, I remember when we went to our Red Sox Mariners outing, which again, don't want to talk about the Red Sox because that's just gone completely off the rails in these last couple of days. I just remember I should have used Gametime to buy our tickets because there are such great things on there, like the flash deals and last minute tickets. You get images from your seat views, which I think is awesome. And it's why Gametime is the fastest growing ticket app in the country. You can get images of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, just 2 taps and you're set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email to find them. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So this is a very obvious question that we posed here, but it just kind of gives us an opportunity to talk about some of the other guys that have stood out on a national spotlight for the University of Washington. So will Michael Penix be the highest finisher in UW history in terms of Heisman vote? I think the answer is yes, and we can, because even last year, he end up finishing 8th last year, like without the numbers in front of me. I believe
so. 8th or 7th. He was in the top 10, but not in the top 5.
Right. And he finished high enough last year without the campaign, without any of these things. And, that tough stretch in September, October, they lost a couple of games back to back and then just finish out the rest of the year really strong. But it's something where I think that that's very possible. And we can look at Jake Browning in 2016. He wasn't marketed at all. And it's something you said to me the other day is if there was any kind of marketing campaign behind Jake Browning, would he have won? No, absolutely not. But would he have been invited to New York? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I remember hearing that back in, I think early November 2016. I remember talking to somebody who was involved with the Heisman who actually was, first of all, let me preface that conversation by saying the Heisman Trust was surprised that there was no campaign in October, at least some form of campaign, because it was clear by the end of September that Washington was going to be a major player in college football. That's in 2016. When it came to November, there was still no campaign. And what I was told by a couple of different people was that Washington was not intentionally not going to have a Heisman campaign for Jake Browning. For whatever reason that was, I don't know what the reason was for that, but it wasn't an accident that there was no campaign. Now, it wasn't that they were trying to silence Jake or do anything like that. You have to remember it was Chris Peterson's program. And it's not that Chris Peterson doesn't want a Heisman, but I think especially with what that season represented, because that was the start of their run, not the end of their run, kind of like with Michael Penix this year, where, hey, this is Penix's last year. It's a big thing. We're all doing that. Browning still had 2 more years to go after that. So I think that also kind of played into a factor of it's almost like, hey, do we want to hype up, Austin Mack next year making the Heisman, or is he really better suited to have that as a sophomore or a junior when that campaign can actually be legitimate? Not that it would have been legitimate for Jake, but I just think it was more of a concerted effort to not do that. And I think this time, those are 2 totally separate situations. I think Jake would have gotten invited, regardless of how that season played out in the final month of November. He was going to get invited if they did any form of a flyer campaign, and they just chose not to do it.
And that's something where that's one of the reasons I wanted to touch on that in the first segment is because that's a very important part of this. That marketing, that national recognition is very important when it comes to just getting to New York. And that's something that I think that last year, with everything that he did for this program, Michael deserved, truly. And it's something where moving forward, you talk a little bit about Austin Mack, and it's something where once you see, let's say Michael does get invited to New York this year. Maybe he doesn't win. Maybe it's Jordan Travis, just for argument's sake, just saying it's somebody different because I wasn't going to say Caleb Williams. And it's something where, so he's following up on this dude who finished 3rd in Heisman voting last year when Austin Mack or whoever takes the job next year. It's like, yeah, he's got some big shoes to fill, which obviously we already know, but it just kind of adds this extra layer of intrigue, an extra layer of just interest in the Husky program, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Well, and again, also it benefits Kalen DeBoer that he can now say, hey, I just turned one player who couldn't finish an entire season into a Heisman either contender or winner. And I have another guy coming in on the wings who, Penix, and everybody's very high on Austin Mack, again, in very limited sample size and small. But I think that, again, look at Lincoln. Look at how many quarterbacks, 24, 25, class of 26, that he's able to get committed. What do they always reference? He's had a number of Heisman guys. Granted, they've all won it, But if you can get back-to-back and multiple Heisman quarterbacks, even in New York, that alone sets you apart from these other schools. Because again, when you're going, we talk about what it means next year. You're going into the Big Ten. Ohio State's not unfamiliar to the Heisman. So it's like you're going against these big-time programs. You want to be able to have that cachet, because if you're recruiting if it's you and Ohio State for the top quarterback in the 25 class or 26 class, well, not that I'm going to slight Washington, but it's like you just risk it away, almost like Lincoln Kienholz last year, where it's like, hey, come be developed by us. We're Ohio State. Even though, honestly, Kalen is probably actually, and Ryan Grubb are a better suit, especially for his skill set. The allure of the tradition is what separates the two apart. And again, that's what we've touched on it. Washington doesn't have that history with the Heisman, flat out.
No, that really is a great point. And I'm just going to take a second here to remind everybody about Locked On College Football Live, because college football season is here. And this season, Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live each Friday. Locked On will go live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. So you can find it right here on Locked On Huskies. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, and go in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. And, just kind of circling back around to that conversation, I think that really is a great point, because we kind of look at some of these quarterbacks, especially down the line, that 25, 26, that have been offered by this Husky staff. And it's something where, a lot of these dudes look like they're going to be top 150, top 200 players, where there are so many names. I'm not going to single anybody out and just say, we think this is a target, because they offered like 11 quarterbacks in the 25 class. It's kind of wild, but it's something where I really like your point, because that's something that they can point to and just say, we got Michael to New York, and that's the first time any Husky has ever been there. We want you to be the next one. We want you to be the first winner, whatever that might be. That is such a great recruiting pitch. And even if Ryan Grubb does say, take a job somewhere else, we know that a lot of this engine, and this is no slight to Ryan Grubb, a lot of this engine runs through Kalen DeBoer.
Yeah, exactly. And they've kind of made that clear where, again, that's why Kalen wanted Ryan just to set up and run the offense. But again, it's still, if, let's say Grubb, again, it does take a job, it's fair to say Kalen would assume he would be the next play caller in line. Obviously, he would bring in another coach and do things like that just to coach the room and whatnot, especially being a head coach. You don't want to be that hands-on. But to your point, exactly, this is the fingerprint of Kalen DeBoer's program. I mean, you go back when Eastern Michigan, Fresno State, all the schools that he's been at, it's been the same. Now it's evolved, but it's always been that same blueprint. I guess the only caveat there is Grubb has been at pretty much every one of those stops. So it will be interesting to see what does Kalen's offense look like without Grubb when that day does come. But I think to your point, especially given that how well they've been in cohesion since they've been at Washington, I think even Kalen's picked up some things from Ryan who was like, oh, maybe I would do it this way. Okay, cool. And now he has that moving forward as well.
No, I like that a lot. And it's something we've discussed before. Ryan Grubb has a background along the offensive line too. So he's kind of grown into learning how to coach quarterbacks and do all that sort of stuff. Where Kalen did coach quarterbacks for a little bit longer than Grubb did. And there are things that you can pick up from different coaches where it's, I like this. I like that, which I like that point a lot. But it's also something where I do wonder if he's going to call plays moving forward. I think that'd be a good idea for him. But it's something where, does he just kind of look at the state of the program? Let's say they do make the college football playoff this year. And does he just kind of say, maybe I'm better with this kind of hands-off approach and find somebody that I can really trust and maybe, hold some kind of override, which I think is something that, is just very critical to this conversation in terms of, we want this guy to win the Heisman. We want this quarterback to just kind of go all out with this. But, maybe a different play caller might not see it in the same light.
Exactly. And I mean, Nick Sheridan was another guy who has experience with Kalen, and he also is a former quarterback. So I think there's plenty of ways in which they can divide it up. I do think I know, again, I think the other thing to remember is just because the coach isn't calling plays doesn't mean he's not heavily involved in the game plan. So I think even if Kalen's not, because I think you do want that little bit of autonomy to where you want you want to empower your coordinator. I mean, that's what he had to do to Ryan Grubb. You have to empower them, give them the keys to the car so that they can, grab an extra gear and go. Because if you're too over if you're micromanaging it, then it kind of can get a little bogged down. And we saw that at the end of Chris Peterson's era too.
Now, it's really funny because when we were just kind of planning out these shows, I was kind of thinking as I kind of got everything together for this one, I was like, we haven't really talked a whole ton about Michael Penix. And I thought that was really funny because it's everything that we just talked about in the first two segments is, man, why haven't we talked about this more? But it's also the same thing of we know what we're getting. We saw it last year. And the schedule's going to be tougher. The defenses that he's going to face might be a little bit tougher in some aspects, like especially when, facing Utah, facing Oregon State. Like these aren't going to be easy challenges for Penix. But it's something where, it's just like, I think other areas deserved our attention, but Michael obviously also deserves a ton of attention for everything he's accomplished and everything it feels like he can do this year. So the question, just plain and simple, is we look at what Caleb Williams did last year. I don't think he's going to replicate those numbers basically because he's not going to run like Caleb did. But what kind of numbers, if let's say Michael Penix holds up the Heisman Trophy in December and his stat line flashes across the bottom of the screen, what is it?
Well, you got to start. It's got to be over 4,000 yards, just because that's kind of almost the benchmark in college football at this point to be in that top 5 tier of college football. It has to be over 4,000, because if you're anywhere on, if you're 3,500, it looks like you missed a couple of games, and that's just automatically a sign. These are subconscious things, or people that study the game of college football, voters, Heisman voters, things like that. It's like, and NFL scouts as well. It's like, wow, you had this many yards last year, and now you only have this many this year. It's like, what are we missing here? So he's got to eclipse the passing yards from, maybe not eclipse the passing yards from last season, but he's got to get back into that 4,000 category. I don't necessarily think he has to get to 40 touchdowns, but he's got to get close. He's got to get above 35 touchdowns. The interceptions have to come down, and the sacks have to stay down. I think he can get away with a 38-4, a 38-5, or 40-5, that sort of thing. He doesn't have to go for 40 or 50 touchdowns plus, but not that that's even realistic at this point. But I think he still has to be right up there, because the numbers can't fall off. If they do, it's gonna. Caleb might not even win it, but it's not going to help his campaign in the slightest.
Do you think that the numbers are going to fall off in this year? And it's something where there are a lot of things to just kind of consider in this. We talk about defenses, we talk about the schedule, and we talk about just kind of the way that some defensive coordinators might adapt to what Washington is doing offensively.
Yeah, well, and again, I know I've harped on it way too much probably, but limiting the clock. I mean, we saw it against USC, where if you're not taking big shots and getting, which they did last year. And
I mean, they love taking shots.
And so I think, but the problem is, it's like those become even then more vital. And then, at some point in the game, you want to control the clock in the third and fourth quarter, so you're not taking those shots anymore. And let's say you're only getting 4 drives total in the second half of a game. You're probably getting 4 touchdowns, but they're not all passing. So automatically now you're limiting your numbers, and that means you got to put people away early. So that means you got to be entering halftime with 3 touchdowns. So if Penix gets to 4 and 5, you can split 2 run, 2 pass, and the numbers still end up getting there. Because if you have 3 games where it's, say, 3 touchdowns or 4 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns and 4 touchdowns, that's going to add up. And then you need to have some 5 touchdown games. You need to have, honestly, probably about 4 or 5 touchdown games just to be safe.
I like that a lot. And I think that there are some areas where, the clock is definitely going to be an impact. We saw that just in every game this past weekend. But I think that there are still ways that, they might be able to work around it, because there's something where UW actually ran the ball more than they threw it last year. It's a very, very slight, but they did. So if they want to take to the air a little bit more, I don't know how Ryan Grubb is going to feel about that, because he does love to pride himself on that run first, just kind of balanced offensive attack. But it's something where if they do want to throw the ball a little bit more, maybe his completion percentage isn't nearly as high. He can just throw the ball away, but that stops the clock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's kind of a hard part. Not to interrupt you there, but I think
please.
that you can do. I don't know what you can do, but that you just hit the nail on the head, because that you nailed it right there.
It's exactly, and it's something where we just talk about shot plays, and something this team loves to do. We've seen Rome Odunze just not only last season, but just throughout spring and fall camp, just be there on shot plays. Denzel Boston is there down the field. Jalen McMillan, we've talked about his speed. We know Jalen Polk can get open deep. And it's something where we can go down this roster and just say, oh, that dude's a deep threat. That dude's a deep threat. And they can strike for a 45, 50-yard touchdown at any given moment if they want to. And something where, Mike can always pick apart a defense and take 8, 9, 10 plays to score a touchdown if he wants to. But he can also just say, I'm just going to huck it deep, because I know somebody's going to be there and somebody can make a play for me too.
And you also know that it's fair to say Washington's going to go forward a lot this year. If
Yep.
they're anywhere near midfield, because the more that I'm thinking about it, to your point about the 50-yard touchdown, it could be third, it could be fourth or fourth from probably the 45 or even the opponent 40. You're going. Like there's no question about it, because not to slight those special teams, but I think at that point you're betting on Penix's arm and finding those targets that you just mentioned to get 6, rather than you're punting or trying to settle to get 3. So and all those points, especially with the limited amount of drives they're going to have this year because of the clock, all that is going to add up. So it's about managing literally. It's almost cliche, but it's managing every single play and maximizing every single play.
So speaking of cliches, since this is the "What if Michael Penix wins the Heisman" episode, we have to talk about Heisman moments, which I think they're a great thing. I see this look on your face. It's a great thing for the guy. It can be a little cliche at times. What do you think Michael Penix's Heisman moment is? Because we kind of talked about one game where we can see it already. What? Just tell me a little bit about where you think that might come.
Yeah, I think honestly, to your point, it's going to have to be 3. It's going to have to be Michigan State. He's going to have to not blow out Michigan State, but he can't have any interceptions against Michigan State. Basically, just put that one away. 45-10 result. Just make it easy, no question about it, because that checks the first box. Okay, he can go out, live up to the hype in a road game in the Big Ten and do it. Because again, Michigan State's not going to be great, but that's also kind of almost a trap game where it's like, hey, they could play up, and especially how Washington dominated Michigan State last year, it's like Michigan State's going to have a chip on the shoulder. So that's the first check he's going to have. Second one's going to be Oregon, because if he can get past Bo Nix again, that's going to probably put him maybe either right above Caleb or right there. That's going to inch him even closer. And then obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be the USC game, because whoever wins that game is probably going to win the Heisman.
So with all due respect to Michigan State, I didn't even think about it when I was doing this, because Oregon, yes, that's the first one for me. USC would be number 2, and really, like, if there's anything, let's say they're playing that reel after he potentially wins the Heisman Trophy, that would be the first one. That'd be oh yeah, he went down to USC, stomped on him, 400 yards, 5 touchdowns. He was incredible. But I think number 3 for me personally would be the Apple Cup, because it's just, and it's not necessarily that it's as big of a matchup as Michigan State might be, but it's just kind of, we saw what he did in that game last year, where I still hold true that it should have been a receiving touchdown when he caught that little screen.
Yeah.
But it's something where the coaching staff did a really great job of just putting him in a position to succeed in that game. It's just the cherry on top of the regular season. Let's say they, with all due respect to the Coug, just blow him out again, this time at home. It's something where, we can just kind of leave Mike out there a little bit longer. Maybe our spot in Pac-12 championship game is already locked up, but we want to help him win the Heisman. We want to help him do these things. That could be where, he explodes for a couple of rushing touchdowns again, and maybe he throws 3 or 4 more touchdowns, and they leave him in the game a little bit too long just to run up the score, which I feel like is something that, especially as in, I think we've talked about the Apple Cup potentially moving forward on previous episodes, but that's something where in what might be the final year of the Apple Cup, just a final twist in the knife of the Washington State athletic program.
You just had to say that, didn't you?
I did. I'm sorry.
Just had to say that. No, I mean, it's absolutely right. But I'll go on the opposite side of that. That's also a kind of a game similar to Michigan State, where yes, you should put these teams away easily, but that also means, we look back at that game last year. He started off pretty slow in the first half. Like, that was one where, again, if Washington State or Michigan State or any other opponent plays even a little bit more up to their potential, that game isn't as far of a gap as it was even entering halftime. Because again, Michigan State, they were up 22-8, I believe. The score was a little bit wider than that, if we're being honest. But if that's only a 1-point game or a 1-possession game at halftime, again, these are all the very small idiosyncrasies that Michael and Washington are going to have to manage this year if they really want, because it's what separates getting to New York and winning in New York.
Right. Lars, as always, I want to thank you for being here with me today. Everybody out there, make sure you go check out our work at Inside the Huskies. You can find that at si.com/Collins/Washington. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. Leave a comment in the YouTube if you like what we're doing. If you don't like what we're doing, if you just have a question, we're probably going to do some kind of mailbag on the Friday show. If you want your question answered, please leave it in the comments. Subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts. Wherever you listen to podcasts, we are on there. Subscribe, leave us a 5-star review. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we will talk to you tomorrow.